From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics, here with the Capital Chats podcast episode brought to you by Spectrum. This week, I spoke with former Republican Senator Dale Schultz to talk a little bit about political violence and rhetoric as he experienced it in office and what he had to say about the recent shootings of Minnesota lawmakers. Here's what he had to say. All right, Dale. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I think to get us started out, I just want to talk to you a little bit about political violence, political intense rhetoric that's been going on, and, just the violence in the wake of the Minnesota shootings that happened recently, killing a lawmaker and her husband, injuring another lawmaker and his wife. So I guess just to start off, you're a former lawmaker, you were in the Senate for a long time. What went through your mind when you first saw that news?
Well, the first thing that went through my mind was pretty much the same thing that each time I hear about violence, and that is a deep sense of sorrow and empathy towards people who are put in this position where they're certainly suffering. Their families are suffering, and my heart goes out to them. And yes, my prayers as well. And I don't care which political party or how it started. The fact is, it's a very poor way to solve our problems. And I wish more people had a little more empathy, particularly our leaders. It seems to me that in any organization of any kind, like a society, you need to look to your leaders. I think about the example that John McCain a number of years ago showed at a rally, telling a woman that no, Barack Obama was not his enemy. And Barack Obama doing the same thing a few years later at a rally that he was holding. That's the proper response. Toning it down, getting people focused on solving problems. Is there a risk connected to it? Yeah. Fortunately, I have not been directly threatened, and certainly it had nobody try to run me off the road or shoot at me or my family. But there have been certainly a lot of tense situations, and I guess I could respond to your question by saying, I remember during Act 10, when I was listening to my constituents and not saying who I was going to, or how I was going to vote, I should say, because I was still gathering information. An awful lot of people on both sides got angry at me. But you know what? When I had the protesters out in front of my house that early March, my reaction was to go out, tell them I get it. It's a First Amendment right, and they have every right to be there. My main concern was their safety, and so I sprinkled salt on the sidewalk to make sure that no one slipped or fell or got hurt, and told them they had my permission to go on my porch and get more salt if they needed it, and that my door was always open to listen to them. You know what? And it's little things like that, I think, that help you build bridges. And it just seems we need a little more of that. And when you're able to get by that initial flashpoint, it allows for a thoughtful discourse that can lead to real solutions.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm wondering, do you think that political violence and political rhetoric has worsened or gotten more extreme over the years? How have you seen it change since you were in office?
Well, I think certainly political violence and rhetoric has gotten worse. In our history, we have had a lot of tumult, and there have been periods when things were violent, depending upon who you were in our society. And I'm sure many people would argue with me. But in recent years, I think we've definitely seen a turn towards the normalization of hateful rhetoric and violence. And again, I put the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the leaders of the political process. And, one of the reasons that people don't want to have anything to do with politics, like so many young people, is this sort of attitude that they see going on. And they're saying, if that's democracy, count me out. I just have no interest in this. And And that's too bad because we need everybody's thoughtful contemplation of our problems if we're going to make progress in the future. And likewise, I believe that uh, we just waste precious energy getting all whipped up, and that likewise prevents us from getting to real solutions.
Yeah, I think you were kind of getting to this a little bit, but do you think the rhetoric and violence is, deterring people from public office, and how do you think that's
Well,
impacting
I don't think there's
leadership?
any question that it is a detriment. But maybe on another podcast we can talk about fusion voting and what we can do to empower people who feel left out, unlistened to make them feel um, like they have real agency in the political process. And I think fusion voting would do that. We need more democracy. We need to give people a real stake in the process and real power. And when, you can have 42, 43% of the public not wanting to have anything to do with the current duopoly, I think we have a problem. And if you ask any crowd, uh, if they're satisfied with what they're getting out of Madison or Washington these days, I think you'd be hard pressed to get more than a couple hands going up.
Yeah, I guess you mentioned fusion voting. What are some of the other solutions that you see for this issue?
Well, I think there are an awful lot of good people in this country of every political stripe, from one coast to the other, who are entered into the process one way or the other. Some think the problem is that we have forgotten how to communicate with one another. Other people have, you know, uh, various other reforms like getting the money out of the process, or ranked choice voting. I mean, there's just a whole host of ideas. And, I think as people explore these ideas and discuss them with one another, we're going to find a way forward. I'm not pessimistic. I spend a lot of time out in the public here locally, and around the state, and I see more and more people saying we can do better.
Yeah. One of the things that has come up in the wake of the shootings in Minnesota is a lot of talk about security, you know, how lawmakers can be protected. Did you feel safe in the Capitol when you're in office? And do you think there's any additional measures that are needed to ensure they're protected?
Well, my concern is, again, has been more with my constituents, my friends and neighbors, than it has been with legislators. I think it's ironic that over the weekend we had one legislator proposing greater security for fourth graders entering the Capitol every spring, and at the same time making it clear that lawmakers had the right to conceal and carry in the Capitol. Um,
Senator
me,
Capago's comments you're referring.
yes, it's wrong-headed. It's an inconsistent message, and I think if people would just focus on supporting one another, promoting a positive, intelligent discourse rather than name calling and baiting, I think we'd get an awful lot further. Do I think the Capitol Police do a good job? Absolutely. I mean, I was there for 30 years. I think law enforcement does a great job. There is no security system that's perfect, but adding layer upon layer of security for the privileged lawmakers while really doing nothing for their constituents, I just think makes no sense, is wrongheaded, and leads us in the wrong direction.
Hmm. Yeah. So another thing I want to ask you about is kind of the national temperature under the Trump administration. You endorsed Kamala Harris in the presidential election. So I guess what are your thoughts on where things are now nationally as far as political rhetoric?
Well, let me just say that I have always believed once the voting is over and you have a president, we all need to get on board and say, look, yes, he is my president. She would have been my president. That doesn't mean I'm, a fan,
Hmm.
but we as a country need to work together to solve our problems. And particularly in moments of crisis like we find ourselves now, being divided is a recipe for a disaster. Do I think President Trump could provide better leadership? Absolutely. This reality show approach to politics can make for great ratings. I get that. But, I think the people deserve better than a third-rate Jerry Springer type version of politics. And they deserve a thoughtful discussion about the policy issues that are so important in this country. We have a growing wealth disparity. We have infrastructure that certainly isn't being maintained. The things that we are most proud of in this country, the tolerance seems to be at risk. The expansion of the use of coercive powers of government, I think, has many people worried. And a real discussion of the threats that we face rather than an imaginary discussion of the threats that some people want us to buy into would make a lot more sense. And again, that starts at the top, not just President Trump, but the leaders of both political parties have to stand up and support one another when they are victims of violence and recognize that it takes all of us to maintain this grand experiment that we've shepherded for some 250 years, and we need everybody pulling together.
Yeah, are there any specific changes that you want to see to move toward that?
Well, I think election reform, real election reform, is a big part of it. There's too large a role for money in the political process that turns people off. I think there's been way too much focus on trying to deprive people of their voting rights. We should be doing everything we can to encourage people to vote. Proud of the fact that year after year, we actually increase the number of people voting, not decreasing it. This is our government. It doesn't belong to somebody somewhere else. And we all have a right to participate. I believe that, again, reforms like ranked choice voting or fusion voting have an opportunity to play a role. And the more that we can explore these ideas with our neighbors, the better the chance of us reaching that quote unquote more perfect union.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. And is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
Well, there is one last thing, and that is, more support for the people in our society who are educators and who keep us informed. You're all very important, and I, for one, want to give you a shout out and say we appreciate what you do as a politician. I learned a long time ago that your job is to keep people like me on our toes, but I never thought it was malicious. And I always respected the role that the media and the watchdogs had in our political process. And I think that's something that we need to kind of get back to, supporting the checks and balances that keep us within due bounds of one another.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Capital Chats. In the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about Wisconsin politics, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. For now, I'm Kate Morton. Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.